Artificial intelligence in the public sector. AI in the Trump administration is brought to you by Salesforce. Grow faster and work smarter.
Hello and welcome to Artificial Intelligence in the Public Sector, AI and the Trump Administration, the eighth and final episode for our third season, produced by GovExec TV in partnership with the National Academy of Public Administration and ACT-IAC, the American Council for Technology Industry Advisory Council. I'm your host, George Jackson. The Trump administration just released an early outline of its fiscal 2026 budget request. That skinny budget lacks the usual details and appendices typically included in the White House's submission to Congress, including the Analytical Perspectives volume. So, what are their goals and initiatives for government tech in the year ahead? Let's find out. Joining me now, Suzette Kent, former federal chief information officer, 2018 to 2020 during President Trump's first term. Ms. Kent, great to see you, ma'am. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for asking me to join. Good to see you as well.
So let's talk about the transition first, Suzette, from that skinny budget to a PMA, a President's Management Agenda. What do you expect out of the PMA relative to information technology? What should we look for?
Great question. And even looking at the priorities in the skinny budget, George, I'm actually excited that a substantial portion of those are centered on technology, and the foundation in being able to achieve those depend on the continued investment not only in AI but automation, cyber resilience, research capabilities, that the things that are all fueled by technology. And I hope that what we will see from these priorities transitioning into the PMA is further structure around how those will be achieved. So, the last PMA was modernization, uh, data as an asset, and an investment in people. Those themes are still relevant. I recently had an opportunity to speak to the Oversight Committee about modernization. It's just as important, and we still need to make more progress. Data and use of data, driving efficiency for data sharing across agencies, data to enable AI. Those themes, continue to advance. And then reskilling and continuing to upskill. The only way it's going to be possible to sustain a lighter federal workforce is through leveraging technology. So that means that with that new technology, you have to invest in the people that are both creating and implementing the technology. You have to lean into many of our commercial capabilities in different ways, and you also have to invest in the reskilling of the individuals that are using the technology. And so what an AI enabled workforce looks like may be different. A tech workforce that is more data, coherent, and many of the things that go along with that. So I hope we'll see those reflected in the PMA, and the measures for success, and the way that the PMA is, the achievements are shared, that we're going to see great progress on those things.
We were talking briefly before we went on the air here about the pair of memos that have come out of the White House that are tied to artificial intelligence, M-25-21 and M-25-22. When those are put out, what's the signal to agencies? How should they view those contextually as the PMA is built out, as the administration starts to roll out new priorities relative to IT, relative to artificial intelligence?
I hope they see them as a continuance of, or, a kind of a doubling down on priorities that were there before. During the time between the first two administrations, we have seen massive advancement in the commercial sector. We've also seen fantastic advancement inside the federal government. So we know more. we understand the drivers of the success, those things for which we have achieved success, what that looks like, and where we can apply those. The use case inventories are still in there. The focus on the types of skills that we need, the importance of leveraging data and sharing data. So I see those memos, and if you actually look at the nuances of them, they have those same themes. They have the themes of unleashing, the capability, but they also reflect some of the new learnings that we've had around the importance of certain skill sets, the importance of the treatment of data, the understanding of privacy, and some of the things that we've actually learned a little bit more about the infrastructure and the cost factors as well. And I expect that we will see those, in the budget. We've also seen many of the commercial players have great success in other markets, and you saw that signaled as well, looking at areas where we could duplicate the success that was seen in the commercial markets.
Across this series, Suzette, I've asked folks to weigh in on the risk versus reward scenario relative to artificial intelligence. I probably don't have to tell you that by nature, government is rather risk averse, and artificial intelligence is such a fast moving landscape. Do you feel that government information technology officials have leaned too far into one or the other, risk aversion versus what you pointed out as the, huge potential of artificial intelligence to reshape that landscape?
Well, I think just in the way you asked me the question, you somewhat signaled the answer is that it is a balancing act. I think there are areas of AI, and the reason I've referenced looking at what's going on in the commercial sector, there, as we consider government, that gives us some hints about risk. So there are some things and areas where actually the use of AI technology, some cases language translation, the ability to ingest data from printed documents, many of those types of things, they're pretty mature. And so that means some of the risk has been eliminated. There are other things that you actually see signaled in those use case inventories. It's new ground. So we may have to walk a little bit more slowly, a little more cautiously. We need to use kind of the risk frameworks that are there, make sure that we understand the data that's being used. So again, it's a little bit of both. Uh, that's the reason why it needs to be a dialogue, and it needs to be driven by those who are serving the mission. And the technology team is there to help enable achievement of that mission. In some cases, that those are tactical things that we can make something that happening much faster. I'll go back to the last administration, places where we eliminated backlogs that could run as much as a year, and we got those down to a couple of weeks. Um, Holistic functions that are now being used for preventative maintenance across lots of different mission types. Those things have less risk. They're very exciting. We've seen results. There are other spaces where we have a lot of ground to go, and we're going to have to walk cautiously.
Put the Doge into context as part of this conversation here, Suzette. The Department of Government Efficiency, they've been spread out all across government. Various agencies been very effective, arguably, in shrinking government's footprint over the first few months of the Trump administration. What do you see as the game plan post-Doge? Those individuals or positions or structures that are currently being reshaped, what takes their place ultimately at the end of the day, and where does artificial intelligence plug into that equation?
Yeah, I'm going to speak a little bit kind of from the top, because I do not have firsthand knowledge of and the things going on at specific agencies. But uh, I think part of that role is to ask, how can we do it better? And what's getting in your way? And why do these things take so much time? And really shine the light on places where we might have had a legacy bureaucracy. I know there was something that I worked with, might have even had a conversation like this about where the law was written in 1974. And that law never envisioned some of the things that we were dealing with. So it was, there was this tension of how can we do it better? I think now that that kind of initial pass and those questions around the marrying of how do we do it? This is a priority, and how do we do it better? I think that is, where we are now going forward. And what that should do is galvanize teams around what those priorities are, how we apply resources, and that in turn leads to the questions of where we use technology, how we use technology, and how that is an element of how we make things better.
Is talent, specifically in this vein of artificial intelligence, going to be really important to attract to government once that initial wave has diminished? AI talent entering into the federal workforce.
But George, talent is always important. And it's always a critical consideration. As you and I were kind of talking about before, um, when you bring any new capability, and AI even more significantly, you actually again need the people who understand how that works, but also you need to invest in how people use it in the environment, in the right way. So the only way that we actually retain a that lighter workforce is to upskill our existing federal workforce and attract individuals whose pace of kind of the types of skills reflects the pace of technology. I certainly hope that what we also recognize is that continuous learning should be a bigger priority inside the federal government. And when we talk about modernization programs and when we talk about bringing new technology into a particular mission space, that investment in talent should be ingrained in the project, not a follow on, not an after. We should actually set performance expectations and what we expect people to be able to do well on that job. That should be part of the project going in, just like feature functionality and capabilities and all those types of things. And if we don't do those things in conjunction, we're kind of continuing some of the cycles, right? You implement this great thing, but if people don't know how to use it, does not matter how good the technology is. You still don't achieve the value, the ROI that you forecasted, the mission impact, whatever words you want to call it. You have to carry through to the end, and to the long game should be that we have talent that is continuously learning. And as we continue to modernize and upgrade that technology, the capabilities of the people are mirroring that.
What should the Trump administration consider as roles themselves evolve in this second Trump term? And I'm talking CIOs, the chief information officers, the CTOs, the chief technology officers, the CDOs, D for data, CAIOs for artificial intelligence. How do you expect the roles to evolve? Or if we just don't know yet, what should they consider as they look to evolve those roles?
Uh, I'm smiling because the evolution of those roles is important. Just like we're getting better at the way we deliver on mission, the precision of those roles gets more important. During the first administration is when the chief data officer role was kind of institutionalized and formalized, and we had a lot of people who moved into that role because they appreciated the use of data and they appreciated the evidence and they understood that. Um, but the actual actions in the agency were still growing. Now we're at a very different place. The same thing with the chief AI officer. We made some statements. We kind of set a target, and now we're growing into those things. So what I hope we see, and even in when I was surveying, that's when the president had an executive order on chief information officers and the importance of the chief information officer to have visibility of the budget and all the activities that are going out. And that individual was tied to the lead of the agency. It's been actually, really. Great to see that recognition for some of the new appointees coming in, where that the recognition that the CIO is an integral part to delivering on agency mission, and some of those have actually been stated publicly. So I think those roles continue to be important. I hope that we see bigger impact. We continue to see growth and that we continue to see investment in what that leadership role in the actual capabilities that leadership role signifies. I know a couple of the agencies, the CA, the chief AI officer was saying like, I'm the only person that's kind of doing this. I hope that's not the case.
Suzette, you were honored by both government and industry, even media publications during Trump's first term for jumping into this community with both feet. I mean, you made really strong connections across the board, learned a lot. From your experience in that first Trump term, what would you share with the IT leaders who are coming into this new administration, the do's, the don'ts, the things that you'd repeat or build upon? Give them a bit of a roadmap based on your first term or first run through.
All right, you're embarrassing me by starting with that, but that wasn't exactly the way the question was framed. But I I will tell you. So first of all, it is an honor to serve this nation, and um, think about that every single day. The things that you are doing serve um, Americans, and go at it with that enthusiasm. I would also say that communicate priorities and expectations. There were some times that, especially in my interactions with industry and folks in agencies, the list of things to do is never ending. Focus on the priorities, stay on those. Don't be confusing. There's not a new topic every single day. There are priorities set by the administration, and those are the things that we're going to spend time, talking about. It was also, I walked into an environment, as you said, it came from the private sector, that almost every single CIO and everybody knew the missions, better than I did. Listen and ask how you can remove barriers. And I actually learned so much about all the agencies as I became an agent to help, remove barriers. And as we attacked some of those barriers, that also helped inform places where we needed to either look at policy and policy updates, or we needed to work with our partners in Congress to say, hey, how can we change this? It's time to refresh this, or we have a situation that has changed and we need to do, something else. And then the last thing I would say is celebrate the impact. Um, Take the places. You said government is risk averse. I also think there are a lot of folks in government who are so focused on achieving the next thing and then moving on to the next thing, that sometimes we did not pause to celebrate those achievements, but also understand what those achievements did to mission, and then how we can replicate that and continue to move forward. It was an honor to work with so many of the people across all of the agencies. And the last thing that I would say to the new folks that are in those types of roles is, again, spend time getting to know the individuals, the mission, and how anybody that is, serving in a political capacity can be part of achieving, whether it's the administration priorities or enhancing the overall mission of the agency.
Well, you've enhanced the overall level of this conversation. Former federal CIO Suzette Kent, ma'am, thanks so much.
Thank you, George.
When we return, I'll continue the conversation on AI and the Trump administration with three alums from the Office of Management and Budget. You're watching Artificial Intelligence in the Public Sector on GovExec TV. Be right back. Welcome, everybody, to the 4th Annual Evening of Honors in Washington, D.C. at the Anthem. Let's meet some of the Fed 100 award winners, some of the folks here just to celebrate their remarkable achievements.
It meant a lot because it represented all of the teams that I got to work with in my career. I think it's a testament to being part of amazing teams in the federal government.
Well, it's a fabulous representation of all the people who work so hard in the public service, and nowadays, the more we can celebrate them and celebrate the service that they have, that's really what it's all about.
It's a disruptive time, and I can't think of a better time than right now to acknowledge the enormous contributions that are made by those in the government management community, both in government and those who support government.
Who am I here with and what do you do?
I'm Mike McGinley, and I'm the director of DoD's Gig Eagle Agile Talent Ecosystem. If you can benefit national security, how can you support your government? And we're using artificial intelligence to make those matches, so it's pretty cool stuff.
When you think of the power of our civil servants, what our government does in life of service, to be honored and in support of that is truly a humbling experience.
This is the event of the year for us.
This is the Oscar of government officials that have made major historic contributions. We just love being here.
GovExec's Evening of Honors will be back, and better than ever, at the Anthem on April 30th, 2026. Secure your sponsorship today. Contact solutions@govexec.com. Welcome back to Artificial Intelligence in the Public Sector, AI and the Trump administration. I'm George Jackson. Let's continue our conversation on the PMA, rethinking and re-engineering processes, and the push for performance and management metrics with three pros who know those issues so well. Robert Shea, former Associate Director at OMB during President George W. Bush's administration. Sir, always great to see you.
Thanks for having me, George.
Mark Foreman, former administrator for IT and e-government. That's the predecessor to the current federal CIO position during President George H.W. Bush's administration. Mark, good to see you.
Good to be here.
Last but not least, Daniel Chenick, former career senior executive at OMB. He served under three presidents, Bush, Clinton, and Bush, as well as leading government tech and innovation on President Obama's transition team. Dan, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Shea, kick us off. I mentioned at the top of the program, skinny budget. There was a portion that was not included in that called the Analytical Perspectives volume. What is the Analytical Perspectives volume?
Are you flirting with me, George? I mean, not many people have asked me what's the Analytical Perspectives volume, but it's a great encapsulation of major issues that the budget covers, but the budget volume itself doesn't have the capacity to cover. So you'll look at real property, information technology investments, performance management and evaluation, loans, grants. There are deep dives into the government's position on all of these major government management areas. So it really is like that. Consuming that volume will give you a PhD in what's going on in the government right now.
Now that I'm done, Mark, flirting with Mr. Shea, give me a sense of what might happen now that the skinny budget is out relative to all of those really important issues that he mentioned there.
Well, I think the number one issue is to see what happens as DOGE starts to wind down its initial foray. The reorganization elements are in. A lot of what would happen and why it would happen generally would be in those analytical perspectives. They tell the strategies, the management strategies in particular. My sense is that that's what's working behind the scenes now, and that as we get closer to starting the fiscal year in 2026, we'll see more of that. But I think there's a lot of work yet to be done.
Similar approach, Dan, occurred during Trump's first term. I'll note that at the time, former OPM Director Kay Cole James released a simplified version, Skinny PMA. Kay had left the Heritage Foundation by the time Project 2025's report was issued. Did that work the last go-round, so they replicated it this time as well?
Actually, every time there's a new president, a similar process occurs. And that means that there's first a skinny budget, basically a statement of key initiatives. In fact, before that, there's usually a letter that gets sent from the administration that says, basically addresses the constitutional requirement for the president to send a budget proposal by a certain date, usually in February. And then a short budget comes out, and then typically sort of a larger budget document comes out later in the spring. It remains to be seen, sort of given all of the different discussions happening with Congress around the 2025 budget and the 2026 proposal, sort of how that will play out, as Mark says, so that we still have to look at that. But in the first year of any new administration, it's very important for them to get their policy priorities out and quickly, and then to have those kinds of discussions. And that leads into the fall budget process, which will be a full budget process for the fiscal 2027 budget.
Is it necessary, Robert, based on the flurry of executive orders that have come out in the first 100-plus days of President Trump's second term? I mean, does that help to buttress the skinny budget in any way?
Well, you mentioned the president's management agenda. I do think that the release of that will be an important milestone in the new administration. And to Mark's point, to what extent will it continue the practices of DOGE, or will you see something new? I suspect that a lot of what's happened, and you're right, the amount of attention to the management of the executive branch is at a greater level than I've ever seen. And people are having a hard time keeping up with what's going on. Hopefully, the fuller budget submission, which we're expecting later, early summer, will include a roadmap for a president's management agenda that brings a lot of this stuff together, including AI that we're talking about.
I'd like all three of you to weigh in on this next question, but Mark, if you'd kick things off for us, from what you've seen from this initial part of the second Trump administration relative to skinny budget, to executive orders, to memos put out by OMB, what's missing right now? What's the next big one that you'd like to see out of the White House?
Well, I'm very focused on outcomes, and I think just focused on the executive orders dealing with management reform and performance, there's a lack of clarity from a comprehensive or cross-government look at what are the desired improvement outcomes. In the first Trump administration, we had a big emphasis on cross-agency priority goals and emphasis on agency priority goals. I think we're in an era now of moving the government into the 21st century, and DOGE has done a great job at taking apart the industrial era elements of government. We've got to look to now, how do you put those back together? So I think that we need to see a business architecture. A part of the president's management agenda has to include not just a vision, but more the details about how do you put the government together in a way that improves performance, improves efficiency, improves outcomes. So I think having those agency priority goals, having the cross-agency priority goals probably more prominently than in the first Trump administration, and then having a target state look at a business architecture, which I tend to think should be more regional focused, and I've used the term of a new federalism 2.0 concept for that.
Dan?
So I think it's important to note that the administration is taking on long-standing challenges that have vexed administrations of both parties. The most recent example of that is the procurement reform effort, where they're trying to take a look at, how do you bring the federal acquisition regulation, the FAR, into the 21st century. I think that as the full budget comes out, as Robert said, in the president's management agenda that gets laid out, you'll see sort of connective tissue across a lot of the proposals that have been articulated in executive orders. I think one of the things to look for is how do those get measured in terms of agency activity? Are they rewarded? Are there a set of performance metrics that agencies follow and that they then sort of cascade down to executives, to plans for the councils, the interagency councils, the President's Management Council, and even into contract actions, because a lot of the activity that will occur under federal contracts. So how do they kind of make sure that the priorities in the management agenda are articulated in the way they get implemented properly?
I know from being an active listener of the Gov Navigators podcast, Robert, that performance metrics, Dan may have stole your thunder there. What are you looking for out of the Trump administration as far as guidance, as far as policy right now?
I appreciate the shameless plug, but and both my friends have mentioned outcomes, performance measures. I think it's fair to say that this administration will give significantly lower priority to performance management and evidence-based policymaking. They've signaled that they want a performance plan that's no more than 10 pages. They've signaled that they want no more than 2 to 4 evaluations per department in their annual evaluation plans. This doesn't mean that they don't want to see evidence. I think it signals that they think these various initiatives have ballooned beyond what's actually constructive. So paring back things to their essence is a theme that I think you'll see across the board in initiatives. Sadly, I think that means we'll lose a lot of insight into what's working. And so at some point, we'll have to rebuild that evidence base.
I spoke with Larry Allen over at GSA 2 weeks ago in this series, and one thing that he was bullish about, Dan, was the FAR and artificial intelligence's position or place in it. What have you seen thus far from those pair of OMB memos that came out? You know, the Trump administration's push on artificial intelligence to be a bit more America first in that acquisition. What are you going to be watching relative to the FAR and artificial intelligence?
So the administration has talked about driving innovation, creating pathways for the private sector to deliver capability to the federal government more quickly, more rapidly than the budget process and the procurement process have allowed in the past. So that's, I think, something to look for. I think that how they execute that in terms of the strategy that's articulated in the FAR revision, and then how then that gets translated to the actual RFPs that get written, whether they're directly for artificial intelligence or whether they include AI as a factor that can enable performance improvement or program delivery, that remains to be seen. But those are things to look for.
Mark, you look ready to jump in.
I tell you, there's a lot going on with the DOGE work and some of the initiatives that tie back to Cone and the E-Government Act. These were laws that tried to reform the government's use of IT to focus more on outcomes and efficiencies. The traditional approach when the government starts down the path of new IT initiatives because of a wave, whether it was the internet or now it's AI, is that you go head first and you want to get some experience, you buy into advertising, and you find out that you've wasted a lot of money for things that don't work but were visionary. I think we have to go back to the discipline of having a valid business case, clear articulation of what are the goals of these investments, what are the changes and the risk in change that needs to occur, and what is the cost. It's too easy to go down the path of a vision and ignore the reality of how do you turn that vision into outcomes. We need to get back to that discipline, and Meyer was using business cases. I certainly think that the recent experience with OPM's sole source contractor Workday is evidence. We need to get back to good management decision making.
Sure.
I think Mark's right to analogize this to the dawn of the internet and the government. Things are working at an even faster pace than they were then. I had an interesting conversation with a government executive who was leaving government. And I asked to what extent they were leveraging ChatGPT or other AI tools in their work. And they sort of poo-pooed it, saying that they didn't think the outcomes that they were getting were adequate. And so generally we're entering this new workforce without any facility with these tools. I think it's a sign that the government agencies have been living in a bubble. The administration has said very clearly they want agencies to lean in on use of AI, and there are some really low-hanging fruit that agencies and employees can leverage to get their work done more efficiently and effectively, and they're going to have to with the significant reductions in contracts and workforce that have been taking place. The more strategic uses across the board, I think, will require business cases, but there's just a sea of things that agencies and their employees can do to take advantage of the rapidly evolving capacity of AI.
Dan?
So those business cases tie to key elements that the public expects to experience from government, like customer experience when they're getting a loan or a grant benefit, or the government's going to operate effectively in processing applications for a small business loan or their taxes when they file. And how does government deliver cost efficiency and get to the best result, the best outcome? These business cases really break down into sort of what has meaning for people when they receive services from government or they expect government to operate efficiently. And so how do you build AI into that is something that some agencies have gotten a good start on. They're using AI in different ways to provide better service, and other agencies can learn from some of the leaders.
IT played very highly in President Trump's first PMA. Is that necessary this time around, or is artificial intelligence, so endemic, Dan, that it doesn't necessarily have to play as high as a driver for change for government?
Can I say both? I think it's both critical to the future of how government delivers services, and back to Mark's point, that's a federal, state, local shared responsibility in the era that we live in. And at the same time, you need to encourage the development of new applications in artificial intelligence. As AI evolves and you get into sort of new emerging technologies like quantum computing, you need to think about how do we make sure that the government is staying ahead and doesn't sort of fall behind, 10 years behind the technology curve like has happened in the past. How can we move the government toward a more rapid adoption while we're also thinking about the tie from these technologies to mission delivery?
Robert?
I think IT is definitely going to have to be a focus. It's kind of like when Doge and others in the Trump administration who hadn't served in government arrived, saw the state of IT, and it was sort of like, bless their heart, we've been doing this for decades. If you look at air traffic control, if you look at OPM's management of retirement systems, I could go on and on. Frustration with the state of those platforms demands modernization. Now, whether they'll have the resources to do it in this constrained environment remains to be seen. But I think there's a widespread agreement that now is as good a time as any to tackle some of these long-standing challenges with IT systems in the government.
Sure.
I think we're at the cusp of a major, I wouldn't call it a revolution, certainly a major evolution in the structure of government because of AI. Last November, Anthropic, one of the large AI nonprofits, came out with something called Model Context Protocol. And if you understand the binding constraint on government efficiency and effectiveness, its ability of agencies to share, and I should say utilize shared information to improve the quality of their performance and decision-making. Let's take social services as an example. Now, I think you'd say you've got federal delivered programs in HUD, you've got state and local with federal delivered programs, you've got federal delivered programs with SSA. They all have regional offices. People work in different regions. I mean, they're organized totally differently. The state becomes the integrator of that. The decision-making is very difficult, if not impossible, to truly do the case management for the beneficiary because it's such a convoluted operating environment. With agentic AI and these new standards like Model Context Protocol, you can start to cut across. In fact, you can cut across that data and leverage the AI to essentially assist the caseworker and figure out not how to get the person qualified for programs, but get them the right programs so they can become independently self-sufficient. This is the cusp of a new era, probably 2 years away, but the magnitude of change from the industrial era organizations and silos of today to an integrated support your constituent of tomorrow is going to be huge if we can get the old style way of government out of the way and somebody can align this correctly with change management, with outcome measures, with right investments.
What mission benefits, Mark, is that going to deliver to the American people?
Well, I think we will see a totally more efficient and effective way to marry up economic development and regulatory environment. I think we see social services where people become less dependent on the government and programs that build dependency start to fail. We get rationalization across those two areas. I think the same thing will happen in law enforcement. To this day, 24 years almost after 9/11, we still don't have effective information sharing. We still have myriad programs of land mobile radios, people wanting to operate in silos and realizing if they try to do border security or they try to do counterterrorism, they still can't talk to each other. We thought we had that solved in the e-government strategy. The problem is technology enabled in the old era because it allowed you to operate in silos. The new technology can bust that down at lower cost and lower friction if we have the will and guidance from the White House.
You've already got some great examples of where this is happening. Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, the state of Ohio, Arkansas, they've figured out how to blend data sets so you get an insight into a constituent that's not in the single silo that they're coming to you. So somebody looking for a job needs transportation, needs childcare, better health care, and a holistic look at the data will give you insights into where those gaps are. On the other side of that coin, you've got unprecedented bad actors taking advantage of the government's funding sources to commit fraud. And that same data sharing will allow you to better not only recognize it and prevent it in one case, but to share that across the enterprise so that we're learning more quickly about who these bad actors are and we can prevent them from stealing the hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud that they're stealing from us today.
Mr. Cheney?
Yeah, and at the same time, you can get the majority of legitimate benefits to people that need it faster and more accurately with correct payments. So AI can both enable you to address the fraud, waste, and abuse problem and also deliver better customer service. And the other point is that some of the limiting factors that have existed have been organizational, to Mark's point, and they've also been kind of legal in terms of data sharing protocols that are, often rooted in the 50-year-old Privacy Act that I once had the honor of overseeing at OMB, the implementation of that as well. And we're now at a point where AI technology can basically integrate data across data sets, so you can do things much more rapidly without having to create a sort of a central database. You can do things in a more privacy-friendly way through sharing of algorithms that sort of look at the information and see what's really needed, and you don't have to collect all the information when really what you need is about 10% of what's there to make a decision.
We had Representative Don Beyer, who heads the House AI Task Force, on this series last week. And Mark, I want to ask a similar question to you that I asked to him. You mentioned DOGE a couple of times and the efforts to shrink the workforce relative to the federal government is partly at the root of this question. I've been hosting artificial intelligence-focused interviews for the past several years, and a common refrain, both from people in government and folks from industry, is that AI is not going to replace jobs. It'll simply allow people to level up their work in a way that they don't have to take on mundane tasks anymore. They can be more analytical My question is, based on DOGE's efforts and that shrinking of the federal workforce, is government going to have any choice? Is that true anymore? Is AI going to replace some of these jobs at the end of the day?
IT has always done two things. Number one, it's reduced the transaction cost for you and I to have an interaction with the government and the citizen. Okay, so when you reduce that transaction cost, it means less paperwork, or the paperwork moves faster. There's no question that, in theory, current state, you would have seen that replace jobs. What's happened, I think, in both industry and government is that you don't see a reduction in the number of employees. You see an expansion in the amount of work that gets done. I remember very clearly when I first came in the government in the 80s, OMB, I had some friends at OMB, this probably predates Dan, but they used to do the balancing of the budget on these huge paper spreadsheets. And they also had...
No, I remember.
All right. And then...
I don't.
And so, well, people worked incredible hours on their spreadsheets, their paper spreadsheets. Okay, then Lotus 123 and Excel came around, and the theory was now you'd be able to go home at a decent time during budget season, and it just didn't work that way. The work grows to fill the void. You get more work out of the people, and I think we're in the very same situation. Yeah, it's going to replace people who are doing things or work that no longer needs to be done. There's a lot more work that still needs to get done. And so I think that's the scenario. If you could keep work constant, then yeah, you'd probably see a drop in employment. It's never constant.
Robert?
I will say that pre-Trump, we didn't have an adequate workforce to accomplish the government's mission. And it was really difficult to hire people. We had an aging workforce, many of whom were eligible to retire. That's all been exacerbated by the reductions we've seen across agencies. So there's not only going to be an essential transformation in the work, we're going to have to leverage these new tools just to get the basic work done. But at some point, we are going to have to replenish the deficit of people that has been created in the last several months.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you want to think about it as AI can augment decision-making, help people make better decisions, do so more quickly, more efficiently, and with greater accuracy. And that's going to have the government sort of respond more quickly and deliver on mission benefits to folks at the same time, doing so with responsibility, because there are risks that come along as well in terms of data accuracy that need to be taken into place. How are the algorithms developed? So you need to be careful in how you apply the AI to address these, but it can result in a better, more productive workforce at any size.
What about workforce-oriented changes? Dan, what do you expect from the Trump administration? What is necessary to make that remaining workforce as effective as humanly possible?
So certainly training and having people who are both the developers and the users be trained, because there's sort of different levels, right? There's how does government make sure that the people who are developing the actual core technology, the software applications, the cloud native applications that are being developed, are doing so in a responsible way, that they build cybersecurity into the development of the application, as opposed to not thinking about it only after there's a cyber incident that occurs. So that's one side. How do you basically get the technology workforce up to speed? Then there's the vast majority of government workers at all levels of government who are the users of the technology, who are can use it for good, but if they don't use it responsibly, it's just another kind of similar to cybersecurity. If they leave their password on a sticky pad on the computer, that's probably not the best cyber hygiene technique. So there are similar sorts of trainings about how to use AI responsibly, consistent with ethical standards that are going to need to be in place.
Some of the early signals, Mark, from the Trump administration are tied to artificial intelligence and risk mitigation. I wrote down memo M-25-21, and it keeps chief artificial intelligence officers, it keeps use case inventories, but something new that it introduced is that non-compliant systems will be shut down ultimately. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I worry that some of these things become compliance exercises as opposed to value exercises. So I'm not quite sure how this is going to play out. I do think that we've got too many chiefs in the IT arena, and that creates conflicts in decision making, makes it hard for a secretary or deputy secretary that may not have gone through a transformation like this to make the decision. So I'm not quite sure how that is going to play out. I would say, though, that a big part of this has to be having that target state vision in the agency for the architecture, be it their business architecture or their operating model. I don't think that the agency heads or the CIOs have come into the government realizing that these industrial era operating models with today's and the emerging AI technologies don't really work well together. And somebody, ideally that chief management officer, the deputy secretary, maybe it's working with the chief data officer and the chief AI officer and the CIO and the CFO and the chief procurement officer. A lot of chiefs have to figure out what generates the most effective operating model, taking into account these new technologies and the work that no longer needs to be done. I'll give you an example. Typically in the agencies that are doing benefits determinations, they're taking in some documentation and some person in the field has to make sense of matching up that with the regulation that says, here's the benefit and how much benefit you get. People working in the field, that's a difficult problem because the information is consistent, inconsistent, it's missing, and you have to use a lot of judgment. When we've looked at this in various agencies at Amita, the company I'm at now, and applied AI tools to that, we see that there are big discrepancies on the same data on what a field officer may make as their decision. Okay, so in the future, you're probably not going to get rid of that field officer, but you're going to apply AI. And as Dan said, these decisions are going to be made better and faster. And we're talking about going from 365 days to maybe 1 or 2 days. What does that mean for the operating model for these agencies? Huge implications.
Dan, as I mentioned at the top, you've helped to craft management agendas for multiple administrations. As you look at this one, what advice would you impart to them so they can be successful at what Mark's talking about there, building that business plan, building the leadership chain? From a management agenda perspective, what would you tell them to do?
So we would be remiss if we didn't remark upon the fact that I was working with Mark and Robert on the creation of the President's Management Agenda, the first one in the Bush administration. And here we are 23 years later, still working on these kinds of issues. I think, first of all, it needs to reflect the priorities of any administration, whether that's government efficiency or security or whatever the priorities are going forward in terms of management, that will get reflected in the Analytical Perspectives document. And then I think you need a set of metrics that are easily understandable. It is the president's management agenda, so the president, should be able to determine whether or not agencies are being successful at implementation. And the third important point is to link. Often management agendas are about functions like technology or procurement or financial management. The harder part is linking that functional performance to mission outcomes so that you see the result of the management effectiveness in how the government appears to a citizen getting services or a small business applying for a loan.
Is that far easier to do today than it was in years before based on what you pulled out earlier relative to data in places like Ohio? I mean, can you better link those management agendas to metrics at the end of the day?
I think to some extent it's gotten harder because we've moved away from articulating what are the ultimate outcomes we're trying to accomplish. I think it's safe to say that we're not clear in what direction we're heading across the board. So I think to Dan's point, I agree with 100% of what he said, but a scorecard that transparently depicts where everybody is against these metrics, I think is a critical tool that has been missing over the last several administrations.
Mark, what have we missed during the course of this discussion that you were really eager to get across?
Well, I'm a fan for coming up with the next generation organization structure, which again I refer to as New Federalism 2.0. But building on Dan and Robert's comments, having nowadays a common operating picture, something Shmender Paul's written about, so that you have the metrics and at the key points in time, be they monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, the president ought to be able to see the status of progress and the results coming out of the initiatives. It floored me when I got to OMB in 2001 that we were still doing data calls as opposed to the president being able to see real-time data, what's happening in the government. We're still doing data calls. No other large organization operates by data calls. The concept of enterprise information management, a key part of the Evidence Act, has to move forward from a federal data strategy focused on agencies to an enterprise approach now.
One of my favorite movies of all time is Pistol Pete. And Pistol Pete, in the movie, his dad is his coach, and his dad has this famous line, and I'm going to butcher it, but he holds up a basketball and he says, "This is what I know about basketball, and this is what you know about basketball," and points to one point on there. I feel like the younger Pistol Pete, every time I sit down with the three of you, your knowledge of management and government, so impressive. Robert Shea, Mark Foreman, Dan Chennick, thanks to you all.
Thanks, George. That was
Thank
beautiful.
you. That's very nice.
Up next, the view of artificial intelligence as a through line. Salesforce industry advisor Mia Jordan joins the program right after this.
FITARA, FITARA, triple word score, 30 points.
Are acronyms allowed?
Sure, laser, radar, FITARA, they're common parlance.
Okay. FITARA's triple word score, 33 points.
That's not a thing.
Learn the rules, meet the players, win the business of government with GovExec TV. Find out more at govexec.com/feature/TV.
Are you sure?
Challenge.
So far, you've heard from 4 top former officials from the Office of Management and Budget, including 2 federal CIOs, formers, about how artificial intelligence could look in the second Trump administration. Let's get perspective now from an industry leader who's twice served as Chief Information Officer at the agency level. Mia Jordan, industry advisor at Salesforce, former CIO for both Federal Student Aid and USDA Rural Development. Mia, always great to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
So kick us off. Before we went on the air, you told me that you see artificial intelligence as a through line.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Yeah. So often people are talking about AI as if it is its own pillar, and I see it as the through line. When I think about what we're doing at Salesforce, and as I look at other product companies and the way that they are embedding AI in their technology, it is the connective tissue. It is going to be embedded in citizen experience, workforce, data, climate. So that's what I meant when we really start thinking about how we're going to deliver better services, better government to the people. We really should consider it as the connective tissue and not as this thing that stands next to the things that we need to do. At Salesforce, we say that we bring AI to our customers in the flow of work. And so therefore, it's not this swivel chair capability that happens outside of the way that our customers are doing their work on a day-to-day basis.
I love that. Not the swivel chair capability. I'm going to use that.
Please do.
I'll quote you when I do. In the near term, what do you see as sort of the biggest impact areas for artificial intelligence? Pull us out of, big picture, mission impact, the CX, the workforce, the data that you reference, where's this making a tangible impact for government?
Sure. So I see it in having the greatest impact in the high impact areas, right? The places where we serve the most people, where there is the most friction because we have systems that have been designed not to talk to each other, but also in the rules based. When we think of our experiences with AI, we can think of, we used to go out and build rules-based engines or buy rules-based engines. You can train AI now to understand the rules and then to be able to solve those things, not just from 9 to 5:30, but 24/7, right? And that's how we want to serve our constituents. We want to serve them where they are and when they need the services. Customers are accustomed to, that's a play on of words. Customers are accustomed to, self-guided applications, whether it's filling out a form for a credit card on a bank website or going through and booking travel. Those things don't require a human being to do. And so we should really think about moving from a reactive government to a proactive government. And I think that's where we really want to see the greatest impact if we're going to make this investment in AI tools.
My next question, Mia, you know this landscape backwards and forwards. I mean, the mission of government, in large part, is about the promotion of the public good. Where do you see AI or technology more broadly, if you prefer, being a catalyst for change for those organizations?
Wow. Well, as we've seen the scale down of employees, right, in federal agencies, I think the greatest catalyst is to really think about how do we unlock all of the knowledge and institutional knowledge that sits in share drives, that sits in SharePoint sites, that sits all over the organization that's not necessarily in a well-designed way to be able to access. That's, I think, a very fantastic place to really start about how do I unleash and unlock that data so that as we're bringing new employees into government, new staff, or if we're truly going to adopt the mindset of do more with less, then having access to that information where you can write a prompt, where you can ask a question of the data that you're working on, where you're seeking an answer, I think that's the first place that many organizations should start. I think the second place then is really thinking about those benefits and services that we provide as the new administration launches new programs, either grants or loans or the things that they're going to do to stimulate the economy. We should really be looking at those areas as well as to how do we serve those constituents faster, better, and accelerate the time that we're able to get services to the public.
Salesforce has been a leader in artificial intelligence for years.
Yes, a decade.
Upskilling and reskilling is going to be a big focus for this administration, certainly future administrations as well. Mm-hmm. What lessons can they take from a company like Salesforce and employ through OPM or other agencies?
Oh, I love that question. So the way in which Salesforce produces its technology and the way that Salesforce ultimately adopts its own technology in-house is that it starts from the top down. So it may be surprising to you that as we launched Agentforce, we literally had a leadership offsite and we also had, I think, over 70,000 people online in attendance at this leadership offsite that was happening. But there were 600 to 700 leaders in the room that were responsible and accountable for learning how to build an agent themselves. So in other words, what I'm saying to you is we're not just producing technology, right? We are embedding technology in the way that all of us work, not just a few of us. I can reflect on my time in government where a new piece of technology was rolled out and only IT and that portion of the business was responsible for learning that technology. I think with AI and this notion of AI in the flow of work, whether it be predictive analytics or just basic automation or using it to build a prompt or connect data, all of us will be forced, I think, to really pick up this technology and learn how to use it in our day to day. And I think that's going to be a real shift for the federal space as they adopt AI over the next years and months.
I'm familiar with Agent Force. For the uninitiated in our audience, Mia, give us a, elevator pitch, a crash course. What is Agent Force that you reference there?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, Agent Force has been embedded into the Salesforce platform. Again, we are of the mindset that we should be thinking about AI in the flow of work. And so agents can be used to go and retrieve information. Think a rule, right? Very different from a bot where it's very constrained to just the parameters that you give it, but it is able to think very much like how we use ChatGPT in our personal lives. You can write a prompt where you're looking for a certain policy. And it's all based on these 5 attributes that I will give you. First and foremost, the role. What is the role that you want the agent to play? Very much like how you would hire an individual, right? I want to hire an administrative assistant. The second thing is, what is the action or what are the actions that you want that agent or that role to take? Thirdly is data. Then what data should that agent have access to? And that's just like when you bring a new employee on board and you say, these are all the systems that I want that employee to have. Next is guardrails. You can literally tell the agent what you want it to do and what you don't want it to do. And then lastly is this channel. And so, in other words, where do I want the agent to actually do this work? Do I want it to do it in these systems that I've given it access to? Do I want it to do it in email? Do I want it to perform its function in Slack or some other tool? I think that's where we're seeing our customers really turn the corner in terms of understanding how to employ and deploy agents. I was with, if I could just share really quickly, I was with an individual in our company who's called a Salesforce futurist. And essentially, he is a really smart scientist, PhD, that really understands how technology works. And he talks about, or he referenced what our CEO, Mark Benioff, recently said in an interview, that this is the last generation of leaders and managers that will only lead and oversee human beings. The next generation of management will not just oversee human beings, but also oversee and manage the agents that are in their enterprise. I thought that was absolutely fascinating because of my age and the trajectory that I've seen technology take. And here we are at yet another leap. And I'm really excited about that.
That is fascinating stuff. Mia, before you go, one last area I want to hit is acquisition. I know that this nexus between artificial intelligence and acquisition is a passion area for you. Why is that the case?
Sure. We can't continue to buy in the 20th century way. We really have to, we talked about upskilling, right? But we really have to think about our acquisition workforce and really think about enabling them, training them, and keeping them on a path to where they really understand the technology that is available to the federal government. Right now, the government has a stack of technology, commercial grade technology that's used in private entities, Fortune 500 companies. And so I'm passionate about this area because as we're talking about low code, no code, AI, if we're thinking about reuse of technology that an agency has already purchased, or this notion of composability where we want our system integrators to be able to deliver, I like to call it in Legos, where we can move those Legos around, or we can copy those Legos and put them someplace else. Our acquisition professionals sit right at the nexus of that. And if they don't understand the tools and the principles in which those tools are designed and can ultimately be delivered, I think we'll miss the boat.
I've been on the swivel with Mia Jordan, industry advisor over at Salesforce. Mia, always a pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, George.
And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. That's a wrap for Season 3 of AI in the Public Sector. Big thanks to the National Academy of Public Administration and ACT-IAC, the American Council for Technology Industry Advisory Council, as well as my esteemed collaborator, Alan Balutis, the driving force behind all 3 seasons of content. For GovExec TV at our Watergate studios in Washington, D.C., I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.